Hi again then guys, and so we've got another special project replica build for you today, and this time it's a slightly more obscure replica that we're doing. It's a replica of a tuner car, which we usually don't do, but this is actually one of my personal favourite tuner cars. It's also one of my favourite imports, one of my favourite coupes, the Hyundai Genesis. I absolutely love this car. I think it looks fantastic. Now the replica that we are making is, as you'll have seen from the title, a replica of the HKS Genesis, which is not just a Genesis with a fancy body kit and a bit of extra power. It's actually a completely overhauled vehicle built for the SEMA Motor Show. It was built in 2010. It's based on the slightly older generation Genesis, the pre-facelift model, which in my personal opinion is better looking than the current one, but that's just me. And as I said, it's more than just an upgraded model. For a start, instead of the 3.8 litre engine which it usually has, it's got a 2 litre turbo. It has significantly more power than the Genesis usually has, and it is also a little bit heavier. Now visually, you can actually get this to be surprisingly similar to that car using Gran Turismo's tuning engine, which is cool. It's obviously nice to get it as close as we can get visually. The rims are almost an exact match, if not exactly the same. The colour is very close, and even the bodywork is actually not far off at all. Obviously we can't get a 2 litre engine on the game, but that's just something that we have to work with. So we'll go over first of all to the visual tuning garage, because the visual aspect of this build is very important. Then of course we'll go over for the mechanical setup, and finally take it out to Suzuka to see how it performs. Now for the visual look of the car, you've got a couple of body kit options. Technically speaking, both of them don't actually look too far off. I've opted though to go for the Type B kit, primarily due to the side skirts. They actually look very similar to the actual car. They also make the back end more aggressive with that particular body kit. As far as the front end, it doesn't really look like the real car, but there's nothing we can do about that because it's the facelift model. There is no flat floor. For the rear wing, I would recommend leaving the standard wing because it actually looks very close to the upgraded wing of the HKS model. There is also a carbon fibre version, but the actual HKS car doesn't have that, so I'd recommend leaving that. As far as the rims, you want your standard size, as tempting as it is to go for the bigger ones, because HKS actually tuned this car in a very tasteful way. They held back in some regard. So you want the Raise RE30 rims, which as I said are actually virtually exactly the same as the rims on the real car. They may even be the rims on the real car, and I've opted to leave them that same colour, that kind of creamish silver that you get in that dealership. I have fitted the additional meters on this car because it seemed appropriate to being a tuner car. I've opted for water temp, oil temp and fuel gauge, and for the colour I've gone for 216 on the hue, 80 on saturation and 100 on brightness, just to get it to look similar to the existing HUD. As far as the body itself, for the paint colour, there are a number of reds that you can get on the game, and the actual SEMA show car was in red, and the red that it was is a bright red, but at the same time it's got a little bit of dullness to it, like a little kind of pastel kind of colour to the shade of red. So I've gone for Viper Red, which is very similar. It's got that strong bright red, but also with a little bit of dullness that makes it look like a slightly older style red, and I've gone for that same colour on the brakes. As already said, I left the rims the stock silver, so that's it overall for the visual look. The wing of course is automatically the same colour, so that's it for the visual look. It actually looks very similar to the actual car, which is pretty cool considering it's a newer model. So now let's go over to the mechanical side of things for the tune setup. Now for any who have seen my replica builds before, you'll of course know that I like to make these rounded off PP wise if at all possible, and as you can see this one rounds off really nicely to 500. Although it's not primarily a competition spec build, it does of course mean that if you want to use it in racing, that option is there for you. Now I've gone for sports soft tyres because it is kind of more of a street based tune. I've opted to upgrade the brakes for two reasons. One, it is a tuner car so it should feel better than the stock model, but also so that you can paint those brakes As far as the suspension, the HKS is actually not a slammed car. As I said, HKS were quite tasteful in the way that they upgraded the car. They didn't slam it and make it look ridiculous. Not that slamming looks bad, I just don't think it suits this car. I've opted to put the ride height on 80 on the front, 105 on the back. That sounds like kind of a hot rod thing to do, but all that does is evens it out, because this car naturally has quite a sagging back end, and you don't really want that. For the springs, we've increased them to 850 front and rear, the dampers to 4, we've left the anti-roll on 3, neutral camber and toe. For the gearbox, I wasn't able to find out if HKS upgraded the gearbox that they were using, so I've just opted to leave the stock one in there to make it feel a bit more authentic. Plus it's not a top speed tune anyway, so it doesn't really matter. For the same reason as the brakes, I've upgraded to the clutch, flywheel and prop shaft to race spec, and for the diff I've got the lowest initial torque, highest acceleration and braking. As far as power, we do have an oil change, and I would recommend having the stage 3 engine tune and the sports exhaust. Very specifically, you do want the sports exhaust because the actual HKS car has quad chrome pipes. That's the primary reason why we've done that. And then you want to reduce it down to 95% power, which gives you the actual power of the real car, which is 440 horsepower. You want to leave the weight loss stock and actually add a 36 kilo ballast. I've opted to put that 26% towards the rear to make the weight distribution 55-45. You don't necessarily have to do that though, and that brings us up to the actual weight of the real car, which is 1593 kilos. So that's it overall for the mechanical setup. Now let's finally take it out to the track to see how it handles itself. Now usually when you upgrade the Genesis, especially to the limits of its spec, it can easily become a very, very tail-happy car. With this particular build though, it keeps itself under control really well. It actually does a lot of the work for you, but at the same time you can definitely get the tail out when you want to, and drift it. Overall, I'm very happy with how authentic this looks to the real car. Despite technically being a different vehicle, we've got the look pretty spot on as far as what we've got to work with, and the performance feels very close to what this car should feel like, because as far as I'm aware, the only other racing game to feature this car was Forza 3, and it actually feels similar to that car on that game. So overall, if you decide to use this replica of the HKS Genesis, obviously I hope you find it fun and potentially competitive, maybe at the 500 pp level. And if you'd like to keep up with other replicas like this in the future, be sure to hit subscribe down below for that. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.